The case we're going to talk about today is both bizarre and senseless. How does a hunter go deer hunting a mile from his home and disappear, never to be seen again? It may seem like a possible tragic accident, however the clues at the scene would tell a very chilling story. Let's talk about Ludger Belanger. Ludger Belanger grew up in Mechanic Falls, Maine, into a big family that included 8 siblings. In high school, Ludger, nicknamed Luigi, would move with his family to Washington, Maine. Shortly after high school in 1971, Ludger would marry his high school sweetheart Linda, and they would start a family. In 1975, by the time he was 25 and Linda was 20, they were already the parents of 3 little girls. Ludger got work as a heavy equipment mechanic, and Linda had recently started working at a nearby restaurant. By all accounts, they were a loving family, and Ludger was described as a devoted father and a kind person who loved to hunt and fish. However, like many young couples, there was a financial struggle raising a family of 5. On the morning of November 25, 1975, just 2 days before Thanksgiving, Ludger, Linda, and Ludger's brother John went out early that morning hunting. The goal, of course, was to find a deer to help feed their family through the winter. After no luck, Linda and John headed home. Linda had a job she had to get ready for. Ludger had asked to be dropped off at the top of a hill near their home to continue to hunt for a deer. Because of the snow that had just fallen, he would be driving Linda to her job that day. Ludger told his wife he would be back home in an hour. She watched him walk across the field carrying a hunting rifle and wearing a black and red plaid jacket, green pants and boots, and an orange hat. That was the last time she would ever see her husband. While this case isn't as widely publicized as I wish it was, there are a few articles out there, as well as a few podcasts, which are Dark Down East, Locating the Lost, and The Misery Machine. There's also a book that devotes an entire chapter to the Ludger Belanger story titled Open Season, True Stories of the Maine Warden Service. Most importantly, I want to thank Ludger's wife Linda Belanger, now Linda Perkins, for speaking with me about the case when I was doing research for my original article. She is such a kind and gracious woman who is still willing to do anything to get her husband's case out there. I also want to direct everyone to the Facebook page, Justice for Ludger Belanger. It is run by Ludger's family and is a great source of information on this case. When an hour and then 2 passed, Linda began to worry. Ludger knew she would need a ride to her job, and of course he was never one to leave the family without a reason. The family began their own search, and people with their snowmobiles would try to find him, calling his name. Soon after he was known to be missing, the Maine game wardens came out and took over the search. The Maine State Police were also notified. Linda Belanger knew something was really wrong. She became very upset and was even hospitalized that night due to stress. She told me she doesn't even remember being brought home later that night. She was in such a state. The Maine game warden continued to search tirelessly for Ludger. They searched all night, knocking on doors to see if anyone had seen anything. They finally had success. A nearby neighbor named Clayton Crosby said he had watched Ludger out his kitchen window walk into the woods that day. He even offered to help the wardens look and would show them where he had last seen the missing hunter. They discovered tire tracks along the ridge as well as 2 .30-30 cartridges. They also found the guts of a deer. The scrotum left behind told them Ludger had apparently shot a big buck and had cleaned it there. It appears he had gotten the large deer he wanted to feed his family through the winter. Even though there had been snow the day before Ludger went missing, as well as after he went missing, the wardens were able to find out a lot of information in the snow tracks that were left behind. It appears by the Maine warden's investigation retracing the snow tracks that after Ludger had shot the deer, he had walked his gun ahead and rested it on a tree. They believe he then went back to drag the deer to a nearby tote road, Creamer Lot Road. It was a quarter of a mile away, but drivable. The next set of clues, however, proved to be very disturbing. It appears by the tire tracks found at the scene that a car pulled in to where Ludger had dragged the deer. They were able to see where there were two males who got out of this vehicle, driver and passenger side. One had a cane and apparently had an injured left foot that he dragged sideways. The two men then apparently urinated in the snow and discarded their cigarette butts and beer cans. The man on the driver's side was shown walking towards the gun where Ludger had placed it and put it in his vehicle. They then can tell by the footprints that the driver helped Ludger load the deer in the trunk. Ludger appeared to get in the back seat and the vehicle left. Another clue left accidentally at the scene would prove to be the best lead in the case. In the car tracks in the snow, a receipt had blown out of the car. It was from Sully's garage in Union, approximately 13 miles from the scene of the tire tracks, and was dated the same day Ludger had disappeared. The wardens then went to the garage to question the owner about the car that had been there the day prior. He had a very bizarre story to tell. He said the vehicle was a green 1965 Buick Special. There were two males in the car. They would be referred to as Suspect A and Suspect B initially. The owner said they arrived at 9 a.m. and the driver demanded they work on his leaking radiator right then and there. He referred to the occupants as half-baked. He said they told them they couldn't work on it then. The men then came back at 2 p.m., even more drunk, driving up onto the platform. There was steam everywhere, and once again the driver demanded they work on it. They said they had been hunting that day, and there was a shotgun in the seat between them. The mechanics fixed the car as best they could, and the two men were on their way. The main warden then decided to go to Suspect A's house to question him. They had found several disturbing things that made them suspicious. On their initial visit, they found a shotgun that had been recently cleaned, a hacksaw with some unknown residue on it, and a small room in the basement with a padlock. The most interesting thing they saw, however, were packages of fresh deer meat in the refrigerator, even though he had told the warden he had not been hunting. The warden left to go get a search warrant to further go through the house. Unfortunately, when they arrived back with it, Suspect A was having a party. Anything of question had now been removed, as well as the padlock from the basement room. Another very strange thing was now taped on Suspect A's freezer, a newspaper article about Ludger Belanger's disappearance. Not long after Ludger's disappearance, another disturbing discovery was made. The Buick Special, driven by Suspect A and B that day, was found abandoned on a residential road. The inside of the vehicle seemed to tell a grisly tale. The rear seat, floor mats, and part of the headliner were all missing. The back window of the car was missing. In the trunk, there was a strong smell of cleaner. The spare tire and accessories were gone. There also appeared to be deer hair in the trunk, a buckshot pellet, and a beard hair hanging from the pellet. However, the FBI lab results were found to be inconclusive on the beard hair. After the brutal winter was finally gone, the Warden Service organized a huge search for Ludger. This lasted a week, involving cadaver dogs, planes, and divers. Sadly, no trace of Ludger Belanger was found, nor any clues to his whereabouts. Suspect A was eventually revealed to be David Svenningsson. Unfortunately, he would not be around long after Ludger's disappearance to continue to be questioned. In fact, his demise proved to be almost as bizarre as Ludger's disappearance. The end of July in 1976, just 7 months after Ludger's disappearance, Svenningsson was in his house when it was blown up. In fact, the blast was so powerful it blew him through the front door 10 to 13 feet from the house. It is widely believed by what was left behind that David Svenningsson is responsible for creating the explosion, either to kill his wife, for insurance purposes, or possibly both. It is reported he had bought a round-trip ticket to Orlando so he would be gone during the blast. They said he filled the bathtub with gasoline and lit a candle wick with the fuse. However, the gas refrigerator was thought to have triggered the explosion prematurely. His wife was upstairs during this, but was able to jump from a second-story window to escape major injury. David Svenningsson, however, was severely burned and transferred to a burn center in Texas. He died 11 days later before investigators could get to the hospital to question him one final time. Suspect B in this case is now known to be Danny Collins Jr. He is the person who the car was registered to that was found where Ludger Belanger was last known to be. He is also thought to be the passenger in the car that day. In 1977, a friend of Collins, only referred to as Chris, reported to the police that Danny Collins Jr. had confessed to him while they were partying. He said that Danny said they had lured Ludger into the car with the intent on stealing the deer. He said Danny Svenningsson and Danny Collins Jr. told Ludger they were keeping the deer as a shipping and handling fee. He said Ludger balked, saying he needed it to feed his family, and asked to be let out of the car. Danny then lowered the barrel of the shotgun over the seat and pulled the trigger, murdering Ludger Belanger. Chris died shortly after his conversation with police of a drug overdose. The only person alive who is a suspect in Ludger's disappearance is Danny Collins Jr., who still lives in Maine. He refuses to speak on the case. The police have been unhelpful and downright rude at times to Linda Belanger Perkins in regard to Ludger's case. They have threatened any people who want to work on or even film about the case with an arrest. According to Linda, a retired FBI couple had wanted to work on Ludger's case, but were threatened with an arrest for hindering an investigation. If this wasn't hard enough for Ludger's family, Linda, who still lives in the house she shared with Ludger many years ago, suffered a fire in 1981. It was just 6 years after her husband's disappearance, and the fire was very extensive. She was able to rebuild, but sadly she did lose most of the pictures of her husband. On June 20th, 2021, at Linda Perkins' request, a Knox County probate court judge did declare Ludger Belanger dead, based on the diligent search of family, the Maine Warden Service, and the Maine State Police over a period of 26 years. Sadly, Ludger Belanger's case has since grown cold. However, there was a very interesting discovery in April of 2020. A man was doing some digging in some property he owned that was just half a mile from where Ludger was known to have been that day. It was a pair of green Dickie work pants like Ludger was wearing that day. It was buried along with a rope. Linda was asked to view the pants. They were, of course, somewhat deteriorated with the years in the ground. However, Linda did say they looked like a size that Ludger would have worn. The rope buried with the pants was something Linda said Ludger would always carry with him when he was hunting. As far as Linda knows, the pants were sent off for further testing, but she hasn't been made aware of the results. I came across another missing hunter case from Maine that I wanted to talk about and give some attention to. This story would take place on November 18, 1997. Bob Smith was a 70-year-old farmer from Caribou, Maine. He was currently undergoing cancer treatment, and his failing health would decrease his mobility dramatically. However, he was said to be very capable in the woods. Bob was hunting near his family's camp in Garfield Plantation, and he would take his wife with him hunting that day. He had his wife sit at a vantage point where she could help him look in his pursuit of a white-tailed deer. Around 2 p.m. that afternoon, Bob's wife watches him walk about 100 yards west of her location. He was walking south with his head down and appeared to be in pursuit of a deer. His wife waited patiently, and then about 20 minutes later, a single gunshot rang out. It was heard by several people, including his wife and other family members. They waited several minutes, but did not hear anything else. Soon some of Bob's family members from the camp would arrive to help Bob with the deer they had assumed he had shot after hearing the gunshot. The family then walked into the wooded area where Bob was last seen walking into and where they heard the gunshot coming from, yelling his name. However, Bob was nowhere to be found. As night fell, Bob's family was understandably very worried. They called the warden service to help with search efforts. The first night, several wardens would search the nearby woods and roads. They would fire shots into the air, hoping that Bob would fire back and they could pinpoint his location, but silence. By the third and fourth day, the search expanded into one of the largest ground searches in Maine history, involving over 300 wardens, search and rescue professionals, the National Guard, as well as volunteers setting up a base of operations. Air searches were also utilized. After 14 days of searching and heavy snow blanketing the area, the search ended in 1997 with no trace of Bob Smith to be found. In the spring of 1998, the search for the senior hunter would commence. Crews picked up where they had left off and would again search in the original area Bob Smith was seen. Unfortunately, the search would be fruitless as it had been months earlier. There would be pictures of Bob Smith posted in the area in case a hunter or outdoorsman came across Bob, his firearm, or even a scrap of clothing that would help in figuring out this unsettling disappearance. But sadly, 27 years later, no trace of Bob Smith has ever been found. As far as my thoughts, it is not hard to imagine that a hunter could go missing in the woods. However, Bob disappeared in a very short period of time, meaning it was soon after he was last seen that his family began to look for him. A lot of the hunter cases we hear about, it is not known until hours later that the hunter is even missing. It is baffling to me that looking for Bob right away, combined with how comprehensive the search was, that he just vanished. With his limited mobility, it is not thought he could have ventured far away. We do need to talk about the gunshot that rang out shortly after Bob disappeared into the woods. Is it possible that another hunter shot Bob by accident? That could explain why no deer was ever found in the area. If someone did accidentally shoot Bob while either aiming at a deer or mistaking him for a deer, they could have panicked and hid his body. Bob wouldn't have been easy to hide, though, at 6'2" and weighing 220 pounds, especially in a short amount of time, unless the hunter had a vehicle nearby to transport him somewhere. But it is the only alternate theory I could come up with as to why his body can't be found. Bob did have physical problems and was battling cancer, but if he had collapsed due to a health issue, you would think his body would be pretty easy to find. This is a sad case, but it is important to keep his story out there, as it is possible that Bob's remains can be located and returned to his family one day, perhaps by one of the hunters that continue to use the land. That is all we can really hope for in this case. Now as to my thoughts on Ludger Belanger's disappearance, I definitely think, with all that we've learned, that the persons of interest mentioned earlier in this article are responsible. It appears they can tie them and the vehicle they were in to the scene where Ludger was last seen around the same time. Plus, with the evidence of deer meat and their denials they went hunting that day, is just another clue that supports that. From the eyewitness accounts, they were under the influence of something that day, and no doubt saw the opportunity for some free deer meat, and they obviously didn't care what they had to do to get it. Ludger Belanger wanted nothing more that day than to kill a deer to feed his family for the season. Imagine how happy he probably was to have accomplished this, only to have his life seemingly cut short in an absolutely senseless act of violence. I have a very touching photo posted at the bottom of my original article that Linda has given me permission to share. It just goes to show how far-reaching these missing person cases affect people. Not just the people who actually knew him, but generations to come who would never get the chance to know him. Ludger's young grandson had no doubt heard about the grandfather that he will never get to meet. He wanted a picture of him. Linda brought the young boy a picture of him to church one day. The boy was so happy to have a picture of his grandfather and hugged it, and I am told he even slept with it. Such a sweet yet heartbreaking picture of Ludger and his grandson. Ludger Belanger was only trying to provide for his family that day by being a hunter. He could have never imagined that in the end, he would be the hunted. That concludes my podcast on Bob Smith and Ludger Belanger. If you enjoyed it, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find me on Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. You can find all of my articles as well as links to my most recent podcasts on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. You can also reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.